Welcome to the Scaling Up Master Course. You know, the challenge is so many companies start up, but too few scale up. And so the goal of this program is to give you the tools to help you up that S-curve of growth. And along the way, it's going to require absolutely two things, and that is discipline and focus. As you see Scott sharing with you, who is kind enough to endorse the book, one of the latest billionaires that come out of Australia. And our goal is simple. How do we make it so that as you scale up that S-curve, that it doesn't feel like that you're the only one carrying the weight of the organization on your shoulders, that it's almost like you're dragging this weight through the sand. What we want to do is turn it into something that feels like you've got wind to your back, where you're going with the trends and you've got everybody in the boat heading in the same direction. And so again, we want to go from feeling like this as you scale up to feeling like this. And to do this, you basically have got to get three things accomplished. First, we have to reduce by 80% the time it takes for you to manage the business. And we're being literal about that. If you're the top leadership of the company, you ought to be figuratively or literally out of the office 4 of every 5 days, so that you can be then out spending your time doing the market-facing activities that are critical if you're going to grow the organization. And then with everyone else, the other 550 or 5,000, you've got to get them aligned and on the same page. Now, to do that, you've got to have the page. And that's the thing that we're probably best known for around the world, which is this one-page strategic plan. And so we're going to get into this a little bit later on. We've also simplified it so that you've got a better tool called the Vision Summary in order to share this with the rest of the organization. Now, I want you to realize this takes time. If you take a look at Apple, it was 25 years since they were founded in 1976 before they really hit their stride. It was 2001 on their 25th anniversary when they released the iPod, and the rest is history. All the real 10x growth has occurred since then. By the way, same with Starbucks. Started in 1971. By their 20th anniversary, they had just 100 stores. I know that's decent, but it's hardly putting a dent in the universe. By their 25th anniversary, they still had not left the United States. And as you can see in this chart, again, most of their 10x growth occurred afterwards. So, quick question for you. How many of you have been in your business for 25 years or less? If so, you still have time. This thing requires patience. If you've been in business more than 25 years, well, hey, you still have time as well. And if we're going to scale up, the challenge is, how do we remain agile along the way? See, here's how all organizations start. You know, if you've got a couple of people, you're in an office, you're like this initial cell of an amoeba. And then the organization begins to grow, and you start to add functions. You've got the sales function, they get their own office, then you get operations, and then as these cells begin to form, the functions. Now you find that at about 50 employees, you need to figure out a way to get closer to your customers. You may have some customers in particular industries. You may now begin to have different product lines that you need to support. And so once again, you begin to split the organization into further cells. The new agile scale-up is just that. It's almost like a beehive or an ant colony, where you've got small teams that are out there either driving a product, working with a customer, managing a particular location. And the old role of management, which used to be just the movement of information, is today being handled by technology. And what the old manager of the 20th century is doing today is really the role of the coach. There to support, very much like the organizations that I was involved in founding, EO, and then our involvement with YPO. Organizations from the very beginning that have built on this idea that you've got a small team of 8, 10 folks, we'll call them a forum, that have a forum moderator, and then we provide outside training to support those organizations. And these organizations have been able to scale to 10, 15, 20,000 members worldwide. That's some of the tools and technologies we want to bring to the modern company of the 21st century. In fact, let me suggest a couple of books. So we're a huge fan of reinventing organizations. In fact, let me give you a hint. Get that book and go right to part 2, and that'll shorten the time it takes for you to dig right on into what are some of the things that organizations like Gore-Tex and Valve in Seattle and others have been doing for several years. I also highly recommend a brand new book that's come out by Jim Whitehurst, who is the CEO of Red Hat called the Open Organization. In scaling up, there are three fundamental underlying principles behind our work. The first has got to be probably my favorite quote of all time, which is, we have the answers, all the answers. It's the question we do not know. In fact, that's the thing that concerns me. I know that these fast-growing, hard-charging organizations, man, when you get your sights on something through enough perseverance and passion, you're going to figure out the answer. My concern is that you're working on the wrong question. And in fact, in today's age, and it's one of the things that we've got to let go in these new open organizations, is we don't need to have the answers. In fact, what we're going to be learning is that you're going to source those answers from other experts and the crowd in general. So what it means we've got to do is first, set aside our ego, because that is the thing that gets in the way of scaling up most organizations. And what we have to do is make sure that we get the question right, and then the answers will come with it. And so a lot of our work is all about helping you figure out what are the right questions. Our tools and the things that we have you work through are to get you focused on the absolute questions that you've got to get answered if you're going to scale up the organization. Number two, I want to go back kind of in the history of human civilization. Back, the best guess is we've been around as Homo sapiens on the planet for about 200,000 years. Now, for half of that time, we've had the spoken word. What's interesting, we've only had the written word for about 5,000 years, and we've only had Excel spreadsheets for about 50. So I got a quick question for you. What do you think we are best hardwired to do? Stand around and share stories, or stare at Excel spreadsheets? In fact, one of the things that we look at when we first go into an organization is their weekly management meeting. And how much of that hour to 90 minutes is spent with people kind of hunched over and staring, starry-eyed at these Excel spreadsheets till they're blind. Look, it's not in our DNA in order to survive by even writing. We're a being that needs to talk. And in fact, what's interesting, we know that one of the first senses you get in the womb is the ability to hear. And one of the last senses you lose as you pass this earth is hearing as well. You can hear your loved ones say, "I love you," when everything else has gone dark. And so both speaking, which we know activates the brain, puts out the vibes into the world that begins to solve your problems, and more importantly, then listening, hearing those numbers, hearing the data, hearing what the challenges are, is critical then for your ability to see the patterns and trends. Because I know back several 100,000 years, you could hear the enemy. You could hear the animal stalking you way before you could see them, smell them, or taste them. Or by that point, they were tasting you. And so at the heart of a lot of our work is for us to begin to get people to talk again and share in the daily huddle and the weekly meetings and their monthly management learnings, so that they can begin to see the patterns and trends that are necessary for them to make the right decisions moving forward. And then number three, if you were to say, summarize what it is that you guys do in a sentence, it really comes down to this idea that routines set you free. Now think about it. At the beginning of the year, we all set these goals. I want to lose weight. I want to get into shape. But think about it. Unless something changes in what you do every day of every week, something you're either going to start doing more of or stop doing, that goal is just a bunch of hot air. Now, look, routines without goals is aimless, so you need both. But it's critical. Once we set these goals, we have got to do some things on a daily and weekly basis in our routines. And these routines, interestingly, set you free. What's nice is there's a lot of routines that are automatic in ourselves that if I had to think about breathing, I couldn't get anything else done. And it's these same kind of automatic routines that we help put inside an organization. Again, makes it much easier to scale up. So there are these three fundamental principles that underlie all of our work. First, it's more about the questions than it is the answers. And I'm confident if you get the right question, you'll find the answer. Number two, it's all about upping the amount of talk time and interaction within the organization, ironically, in this kind of technology-driven world that we're in. And then number three, putting in place a set of fundamental routines that allow you then to get accomplished these goals that you've taken the time to set. In addition to the three fundamental principles that underline scaling up, there is this critical routine that we found is common among many of the successful leaders and companies that we've worked with. And it's a routine that I highlighted in my second book, The Greatest Business Decisions of All Time. And it was a routine that Bill Gates put in place early on within Microsoft called the Think Week. He realized he was getting buried like the rest of us with this, what I call tower of guilt, this pile of books and manuscripts and PhD theses that have a tendency to be sent to you and pile up next to your desk or on your Kindle. And in fact, in this program, we're going to share an additional set of resources that we're going to recommend that you take a look at, up to 40 various books. And how did he begin to deal with it? He set aside a week, twice a year, where he would go off-site and for 18 hours a day, 7 days straight, he'd plow through his record 112 books, manuscripts, PhD theses, and white papers. And look, he realized that nothing creative can come out of your mind that wasn't put in first. And many of the biggest ideas that have continued to keep Microsoft relevant here 40 years later have been these Think Weeks. By the way, rumor has it that Mark Zuckerberg has also begun to adopt the same routine. In fact, when Eric Schmidt was interviewed on the stage at Michael Milken's conference and asked, what was the key when you were CEO of Google and helping it to scale up? He said it was to shut my BlackBerry off every weekend and read a book or two. Speaking of Mark Zuckerberg, he's had these various focused disciplines to improve himself every single year, including learning Chinese. And in 2015, he chose to read a book every 2 weeks, consuming 26 for the year. It shouldn't surprise me. I've known Mark Cuban for many, many years, but in his latest book, he highlighted the fact that since his early 20s, he's had a daily routine to read on average 3 hours every single day. Not surprising, he's the success Shark Tank judge, serial entrepreneur, MBA team owner that he did. In fact, when he got married, you know how a lot of us guys have to give up stuff like our furniture. He had to negotiate with his wife that the one thing that he was going to stick to was his routine of reading. We just saw the 50th anniversary of Berkshire Hathaway, and that annual letter that they put out is a staple in terms of something we can consume. And in their 50th anniversary annual letter, Charlie Munger, his partner for all of these years, wanted to reflect back and said, what was really at the heart of their success over these 50 years? And to quote Charlie, it was Warren's first priority to reserve enough quiet time to both read and think, no matter what age he's been, that has been at the heart of our success. And so this fundamental routine of whether you learn by reading or listening or programs like this, you've got to get committed, you and the people in your organization, to some kind of routine of continuous learning. A great example of this continuous education is what Arnie Malham has done at CJ Advertising. And so I would like you to watch this video about his Better Book Club.
It's true. Since 2006, we've been paying our people to read. It started when my wife wanted me to get rid of a bunch of business books. She said, why don't you take these to work? Took them in, put them on a shelf for other people to enjoy. But they just sat there. Then I thought, what if we pay people to read? We assigned each book a point value and paid $1 per point to read the books. In our book club, everyone chooses their own book and reports on what they've learned and how they're going to apply it to their lives. We create a system that tracks it all. Every book read and by whom. The people love it.
My favorite part about the book club is that it's employee-driven. It's what we want to read when we want to read it.
I like that it's an investment in me, and it's great to know I go to work at a place that wants me to be the best version of myself that I can be.
I love that it's so easy. All I have to do is walk downstairs and grab a book. Bingo, done.
As a manager, the best thing about book club is that it allows our team to operate from a common core of knowledge.
We all get into a room together and you may hear a perspective about a book that you didn't think you wanted to read, but now you do.
I'm not gonna lie, I love the money.
Why have we invested so much in this? Because we've seen that by reading books, it's made our people better. And when the people get better, the company gets better. It's the least expensive, most effective training we do. And everyone has a favorite book.
Switch, The Compound Effect.
Drive.
Outliers.
The Dream Manager.
The myth of multitasking.
The truth about drug companies.
Made to Stick.
Start with why.
Checklist Manifesto.
See the end first.
Book club is fun, and it works for us. So well, in fact, that I get asked all the time by other business owners, how can I do that? But our system was internal, and I couldn't share it with others. When it came time to upgrade our own system, we made it web-based. So now we can share this innovation with other companies. You can customize it for you and your business. You don't even have to pay people. You can incentivize however you want, or not at all. But we've done the hard work and built a system every business can benefit from. Take a look at Better Book Club and give your team a chance to discover their favorite book. So that's a quick look at Better Book Club, how it's worked for us, how it might work for you. If you want to know more, check out betterbookclub.com.
On the learning side, very simply, if you want to 10x the company, you've got to 10x the knowledge of all the people within the organization. So I want to go back to the greatest business decisions of all time. And I named the number 5 greatest business decision, Jack Welch's decision at GE, at the point when he'd let go 100,000 employees to invest $50 million in Crotonville. But he knew that if you want to get more done with less people, you have got to get them educated. Besides, do you want to have a bunch of low-paid, dumb people, or would you rather have some better-paid, smart folks driving the business? I think it's one of the reasons why the very last priority that Steve Jobs focused on before passing was Apple University. And Apple University, where they are now training the next generation of leaders to drive that business, I think is one of the key reasons why they've been able to double their market cap since his passing. But bringing it closer to home, I loved Henry McGovern's thoughts when he was celebrating the 20th anniversary of AmRest's growth, now $1 billion restaurant chain throughout Eastern Europe and Asia, that in reflecting back, when he said, what was the real key to our success when we started with that first restaurant in Poland? And that is that we always thought of ourselves as a training company first and then a restaurant company. And so I think that's absolutely right, that if you want to scale up, you've got to scale up the people and yourself in order to keep up with the growth of the organization. And in fact, we've looked at various professions. And what I find is interesting is every other profession besides the business profession actually requires continuous education. By the way, which one requires the most? Thank goodness. That is commercial pilots, roughly 60 hours a year. And knock on wood, it's one of the reasons why they got one of the greatest safety records of any industry on the planet. Of course, you'd want your physician to have the kind of hours that they're required, even your CPA and lawyer. Yet, an MBA can have those 3 letters, and I've got an MBA, and believe they still deserve without taking a single course ever again. And so I think we've got to step up as business leaders and hold ourselves to similar kind of numbers. And I want to be very specific here. I think frontline employees ought to average about 12 hours, an hour a month. Let's talk about, a video or something every single month to keep themselves sharp. Middle management, I think, is looking at 24 hours. And if you're a senior leader, I think 45 to 60 hours of formal executive education is required. Again, like the commitment that Mark Zuckerberg's given to himself to read a book every 2 weeks here in 2015. This is a critical routine. One of the ways that we've made it easy for you to be able to get this continuous education cascaded down through your organization is we've taken many of the books that we've recommended in this program and we've created 1-hour programs that you can share with your employees, your mid-management, and your senior team, along with our twice annual growth summits that we host around the world, where you've got a chance to be interacting directly with these thought leaders. Last, it's amazing what technology is allowing us to do today. When I talked about many of us working out and having a coach, how many of us are actually using our smartphone as that coach? I'm a big tennis fan. And when I'm on the road, I like to track some of the majors. And as this photo shows, I'm amazed how right at the tips of my fingers on my smartphone, I can be updated real time, every single stroke, every single point, every single set of every individual match that may be playing at a place like the US Open. And so our view is that you ought to have that same kind of mobile access to the data and information that's running your business. And that's where technology can play a great role. Ourselves built a system called Align that is aligned with all of the growth tools that I'm going to be sharing through this program that allows you to have both PC and mobile access to the data that we're going to be suggesting is critical for you to be able to scale up the organization. And so, in summary, the driver is there. It's you, but you need support. And find a way to get both the coaching, the learning, and the ongoing education that's critical if you're going to be a vital resource to your organization. Once you've got those disciplines in place, what you've got to be careful of is managing and balancing the two critical demands within the business. Look, the one-page strategic plan is great, but it's words on a page. You need two additional things to be happening in order to make this business go. You need people doing stuff. Now, we're going to call that people and process. And there are basically three in each one of those areas. On the people side, there are basically three groups of relationships that exist in any kind of business. First, those that you employ, we're going to call those employees, but that's anybody you pay. So it's employees, it's 1099, it's contract, it's suppliers, it's government officials. That's just a joke. But not everywhere in the world is that a joke. But it's anyone that you need to employ in order to be able to fuel this business. Customers are then anyone who pays you. And hopefully if you've done this business model right, you're collecting slightly more cash than you're having to pay out to everybody else. And that then feeds the third group of relationships called the shareholders. And those could be, investors early on, friends and family, or if you're a public company, your direct shareholders. And so those are the three critical relationships that exist in any particular business. Now, those three relationships are engaged in three basic processes or activities. And that is, first, somebody's got to make or buy it. Number two, you've got to sell it. And then there's a rule, I don't know if you've heard of it, called buy low, sell high. And it's amazing how many organizations are violating this fundamental rule of business every hour of every day. And that's why this third key process, keeping good records, accounting, is critical, so that you know where you're making money by salesperson, by location, by product line, by customer, and where you're not, so you can make better decisions. And so those are the two key demands. And what you've got to balance is the fact that, hey, maybe your employees need to be paid more, but what's that going to do to the P&L of the business? Maybe we've got to do some more things to make our customers happy, but are we in a position to be able to afford to do that? And so you're always balancing both the profitability and the cash side, both the people and the process side of the businesses. And if you open up the one-page strategic plan, what you'll see is that the bulk of that plan is laying out what are the priorities and decisions you've got to make in order to move this organization forward. What you'll see there at the top then, over there to this side, is a place where what you want to do is put one or two metrics, maybe three, that tell you, hey, the employees are happy, the customers are happy, and the shareholders are happy. And then on the other side, what you want to take a look at is to know through data that our processes, how we're making and buying stuff, how we're selling it, and how we're keeping track of it are running smoothly. And if you are keeping, at the end of the day, the people, all the people involved in the business happy, keep maintaining your reputation, and you're able to drive productive processes in the organization, I guarantee you, cash and profitability will take care of themselves. And by the way, we align with Jim Collins, who said if you want to go from good to 3 times good, what he called great, You need disciplined people engaged in disciplined thought through disciplined action. And by the way, that requires coaching, learning, and as he said, technology is a perfect accelerator if you're then going to scale up. And so let's take a look at each one of those. On the coaching side, I've always loved this notion that no one has ever achieved peak performance without a coach. And there isn't a professional athlete that wouldn't think of having a coach or multiple of coaches. In fact, both Eric Schmidt and the late Steve Jobs had a coach. Bill Campbell, probably one of the most famous coaches in Silicon Valley. And if those guys need a coach, why do you think you don't need one? And in fact, that's one of the reasons why we've got a network of almost 200 coaches around the globe there to support you, working right now with about 2,000 plus clients. And so in all the languages on 6 continents, we've got resources there to support you. Now, once we move up from those 4 decisions, there are 3 disciplines that you need to be able to put in place in order to execute on these decisions. And we've already discussed a few of these in this overview. The first being the importance of setting priorities, and those priorities going after the key constraints. Number 2, having real data and metrics, both quantitative and qualitative, that allow you to see around corners, that give you the insights, the kind of meetings that Mark Zuckerberg's having with customers and employees that allow them to better predict and have foresight into what we need to work on next. And then last, it does us no good to have all this data if we don't get in a room and talk about it. And that's why this meeting rhythm that's been at such the heart of our Rockefeller Habits 2.0 work is critical, because this gives us the talk time to discuss the data so then we can figure out what are the constraints where we need then to direct the energies and focus of the organization. Now, to give you an example that this works across cultures, I want to take you to a dear friend of mine, Fred Cresceto's company, Amex. Now, they're based out in Seattle, Washington, with significant operations throughout all of Asia. In fact, he and his family are living in Shanghai. And so right here, you'll see pictures. First, instead of priorities, nothing fancy. They've essentially put their one-page strategic plan up on a whiteboard. Off to the left there is the long-term priorities, objectives. Over there onto the right, you're going to see their 1 year. And what they're discussing here at a live weekly meeting is what is it that we need to do next this week in order to make sure we execute on what we said we've got to do this year and over the next 3 to 5 years. In terms of data, they've got quantitative data flowing in 3 times a day from every single one of their reps of this product that they sell, these latex gloves. And so they've got real-time information and they know where they need to go next or not. And then in terms of this meeting rhythm, here you see a picture of their standard stand-up daily huddle with Fred there on the right and his team, where they're taking a few minutes each day to make sure that they're communicating and everyone knows what's happening around the globe with their organization. Let's now take a look at an overview of the growth tools, and you should have that as part of this course, so you might want to pull those or access those. And they're based on the 4 decisions. And there are 4 decisions that you absolutely have to get right. And there are right and wrong answers. And then the areas of people, strategy, execution, and cash. And why these tools? Well, as a mechanical engineer, I've always been a big fan of Buckminster Fuller, who said, you can't change the way people think. And we're not there to try to change your thinking. All you can do is give them a tool, the use of which will change their thinking. Think about what these smartphones have done to change our routines and our habits. And so in these growth tools, the idea is like Sudoku puzzles and crossword puzzles to get it down and then get it right through these 90-day iterations. And like Sudoku and crossword puzzles, you fill in what it is that you know, and then you kind of triangulate back to the other answer. So if you're somebody who says, look, I'm not going to box 2 till we figure out box 1, you're going to get badly stuck in our process. It's really about picking around at the various boxes, and it's crazy. Kind of the full picture will come into view quicker than you could imagine. And if you need to access more of these tools, and they're in 4-color, they're there for free, you can go to gazelles.com and you'll see a link to these tools. You can click on it, and we've got them in various languages as well. Now, let's open up to the inside cover of those growth tools, and you're going to see our basic 4D strategy. And it starts with obviously at the bottom, and that is that you want results. And the companies that we've worked with over these decades in implementing these tools have achieved really 4 things. First, our goal is to double your operating cash flow. Number 2, for you to average 3 times industry average profitability, which has always been a good measure of the difference between good and great in privately held companies. And by the way, if you get that cash flow improved and the profitability, your valuations are going to be much greater if you're going to be doing any kind of acquisition, M&A activity. But ultimately, in addition to those financial measures, our goal is for you just to enjoy the climb. Now, let's come back to these 4 decisions. And the first decision you've got to make is which one of those 4 do you want to focus on the most next? In fact, that might even give you guidance where you want to pick around inside this online program. So, people, the real measure there is your happiness. You know, how much do you enjoy coming into work and dealing with the customers and suppliers and the employees and peers that you need to work with? And I can tell you this, even though it can be tough to be around people, if you've got a contentious relationship, you've got a customer who's got too big a piece of your revenue, you've got a supplier that's got you in a bind, you've got a salesperson who's really mucking up the attitudes of all the rest of the salespeople, you might even have issues at home. If you don't get those issues addressed first, and that's why Jim Collins was always adamant that the people piece comes first, it's going to be hard in order for you to have the emotional energy to focus on anything else that we're going to discuss moving forward. So, people first. And your real gut feel is, how happy are you? Now, if things are going well, the next thing you want to look at is your top line revenue growth, that and gross margin growth. Those are your 2 best indicators whether you're on strategy or not. Because look, if you've got a killer strategy, your biggest problem, as Andy Grove said at Intel, is indigestion. You've got too much business coming in, and that often kills companies as much as starvation. But if revenue and gross margin aren't growing as rapidly as you would like, you've got a strategy issue. Now, you can get by with decent people and strategy, but if you're going to be able to convert that revenue into profit and spend a lot less time doing it, there you're going to have to nail your execution. So your best indications you've got an execution challenge is your profitability has not grown along with revenue, and you're absolutely working more hours today than you were in the past. You can get by decent people, decent strategy, decent execution, but not a day without cash. And that is, and I'm not talking about whether you can make payroll on Friday or not. This is literally the oxygen that feeds the business model. And there's nothing more frustrating than have a potential acquisition or need to invest like Robert Taylor did in Soft Soap, the $7 million to ramp it up, is not to have the cash to go after those constraints and opportunities. So there you've got people, strategy, execution, and cash. Are you happy? Is top line and gross margin growing like you would like them? Is profitability and the amount of time you're having to spend to execute this reasonable? And do you have the oxygen that gives you the options to go after the things that you need to as you continue to scale up the business? Like the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone, there isn't anything this sequential about these 4 decisions. They're really kind of intertwined. And so if you want to look at them as kind of a sequence, people, strategy, execution, and cash, what's interesting is that whichever one you think you need to focus on the most next, the root issue might be the one just before it. So for instance, if you're saying, hey, I think I've got a strategy issue, it could be the fact that you don't have the right people at the table working on strategy, or those people aren't taking significant enough time, like through the council meeting each week, to work on strategy. If you think you've got an execution issue, it may be because you're executing a mess. Your strategy's not where it needs to be. If you're short of cash, maybe it's because execution isn't tight enough, generating the profitability you need that then turns into cash. And if you don't have the people that you need, it may be because you're short of cash and therefore can't afford to bring the kind of talent in that allow you to scale up the business. And so many times the area you think you need to focus on the most next, go there, but be aware that the root cause might be the one just before. So that ought to give you some indications of where you want to start within this program first. So I want to come back to this idea that it's critical that you have both focus and discipline inside the organization. In fact, again, one of my favorite quotes, it reminds us that the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And so I want to come back to Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. Now I want to take you to the end of 2011 when he's getting ready to take the company public several months later. And one of the routines they have at Facebook is to gather all their employees together quarterly in order to share what is the priority for that next 90 days. And so in January 2012, they put up this physical white tent on their new campus. At the time, they had 3,200 employees, 2,000 local, 1,200 spread around the world, but they're required. It's a mandatory meeting to beam in. And everyone thought that Mark was there to announce the pending IPO. You know, that's a big deal for a company going public. But he hardly mentioned it in passing. What was interesting is he said, look, I've got that distraction. I'll handle that. What I need all of you to do is keep your heads down, stay focused, and continue to deliver. And what we have to do is get mobile. See, Mark had realized just prior to that there had been a fundamental shift as people moved from PCs to the mobile world, and Facebook had not made this shift. And over then the next several months, his mantra, every single hiring decision, every line of code they wrote, every acquisition was all geared around this one single priority, which is to get the company mobile. Now, in the meantime, they go public, $38, and then the stock proceeds to plummet in half. And all of us began to wonder if maybe the luster had kind of come off of a boy wonder here, Mark Zuckerberg. But look, he didn't care because he knew what the organization needed to deliver on. And sure enough, they then got mobile, and the rest is history. 18 months later, they were able to replace almost 75% of their revenue with their mobile platform. 98% of their growth all came from that. And if they had not gone mobile, that blue line that you see here on the graph, that's what we call Yahoo. They had yet, by the time we had done this taping, had been able to move what they were doing over to a mobile platform. And by the way, the rest is history. The stock since then has over doubled, and when I last checked, standing at a market cap of something north of $250 billion. Now, we all have 1,000 things to do, as did Mark and everybody there at Facebook. But your job is to figure out what it is you've got to do first. That front domino, that if you line up all those priorities you've got to find the front domino that if you can knock it over is going to get another 900 things accomplished. And that's what this focus of getting mobile did for Facebook. So I want to recommend a book. And if you said, look, if you're trapped on a desert island, there's only one book you can take with you to grow your company. It wouldn't be mine. It would be Eli Goldrath's book, which I consider the best business book ever written, called The Goal. In fact, it was the first book that was written in parable form. Since then, a lot of books have then taken that kind of writing style. And in there, he taught us something critical called the theory of constraint. See, a lot of people talk about setting priorities, but that priority can't just be anything that you've kind of guessed at and pulled out of the air. It must very specifically address what is the weakness, the choke point. Now, I'm not talking about problems. We're not the kind of folks that go in and say, what you ought to do is put a list together of 100 problems and start working through it. I'm talking about a real constraint, the thing that's in your way of, in your own area that you're leading or in the company and ultimately in the industry, the constraint that you need to both identify and get control of. So again, let me share a story, this coming from my second book, The Greatest Business Decisions of All Time. And it's the story of Robert Taylor. Now, Robert's the guy who brought to the market back in the early 80s soft soap. And when he first launched it, he made a big bet. He spent $7 million in advertising, and he took that thing from zero to $39 million in revenue in 12 months, back when that was a lot of money. I say that tongue in cheek. Now, you've taken your venture from zero to almost $40 million in a year. What's your biggest concern next? Well, he recognized that it would be competition, that the big guys would jump in, the Procter & Gamble's, the Colgate-Palmolive's, could easily jump on this idea and steal it from him. And so he made a very critical decision. Looking at this product, he realized the constraint was the spring pump. In fact, at the time, there happened to be only one company in the world. This is way before China had come on as a manufacturing powerhouse. There was only one company that made the spring pump, happened to be in California. So he goes out to visit them, and he says, hey, what's the biggest order you guys have ever fulfilled? And they said 5,000 units. They said, how many can you make in a year? And long story short, he bought up the entire annual production of the company at 12 cents a piece, a $12 million bet. And the rest is history. When his competitors tried to jump in and see if they could copy what Robert had done, there were no spring pumps. And that gave him the runway in order to be able to scale up the venture further to a point then where Colgate-Palmolive was forced to purchase his company. Now, Steve Jobs faced exactly the same situation. He'd already seen his operating system, essentially in his mind, ripped off by Microsoft through Windows. And so when he's trying to get Apple turned back around and in 2001 launches the iPod, look, it would have been fairly easy for the Sonys and others to go out there and jump on this idea and copy it. But at the heart of the iPod is this proprietary flash drive. And what they did is they locked up the world rights so that when they launched this product, none of their competitors had the critical component in order to scale up. You know, it's interesting. Right now, probably the hottest trend is both solar and electric cars. And there's a guy, Elon Musk, that has been at the heart of both of those industries. Yet, people have wondered, why has he been willing to give away all of his clever ideas around the Tesla, the electric car? Because here's what he knows. At the end of the day, with Ford and Toyota and everybody else jumping in to the electric car market, it's going to be tough for him to maintain his leadership position. But I think he has rightfully recognized that the constraint in really making solar energy both affordable and work, as well as electric cars, has been the battery technology. And so that's where he's betting his billions, opening up the plant, as many of you've seen, in Nevada. And so in all of these examples, the idea is for you to figure out, first, where the constraint is. It might be within you, and you're going to have to get that addressed. And that happened to me when I was growing Gazelles, and I was the guy that was in the way and needed to step aside, move to Barcelona, and bring in some other leadership that have helped us now scale up this venture globally. Sometimes that constraint's within your own organization, as we're going to talk about a process that's not working smoothly, or you haven't gotten the product right. But ultimately, what you've got to do is figure out, what is the constraint in the industry? And if you can get control of it, that'll be critical. So I want to give you some additional examples of companies and organizations that have discovered and gotten control of constraint. Look, let's go way back in history. The namesake for my first book, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, John D. Rockefeller, realized that oil wasn't the constraint. It was pouring out of the ground. It was the containing of the oil. It was the oak barrels that were in short supply. And one of the first decisions he made was to buy up the company that had all of those oak barrels. If you controlled them, you controlled the industry. Let's speed forward. One of the guys that I hosted at the MIT program I founded called The Birthing of Giants, Jim Koch of Boston Beer, you know it as Samuel Adams. His brand promise was to always be the best tasting beer. And they would go out and win all of the beer festivals, including the big one in Denver, where I was born and raised. And at the heart of a great tasting beer is the hops. And there happens to be this spot in Bavaria in Germany that has the very best hops. And Jim and his company have got control of that supply. By the way, one of the best business books, I think, of 2015 called Uncontainable. It's the true story, the biography of Kip Tindall and his partner in building the Container Store. In there, they point out that one of the most important decisions they made was to acquire Alpha, their shelving system that has been at the heart of a lot of their success. And so in each one of these examples, the entrepreneur figured out where was the constraint in the industry and got control of it. So, what is that constraint for you? Take some time and figure that out. So the question's got to be, all right, how do you figure out what this constraint is? And I can tell you the way you don't do it is sitting isolated in your office. Remember, we suggested one of the critical routines is to get out and do these market-facing activities. And so it's hanging out with customers and employees. So I want to go back to Mark Zuckerberg, one of the wealthiest guys in his 30s on the planet. And one of the critical routines he's had in place for years is this weekly, what he calls Q&A with Mark, where he takes an hour every Friday and he opens himself up both in an auditorium for employees that are there physically and open it up obviously online and through Facebook. Any employee can ask him any question every single week. What's interesting is getting these questions and then hearing himself respond to it are the things that ignite within his mind clues and ideas and hints that, hey, maybe what we've got to do is get this company mobile. What's interesting, he's now taken the same routine and he's brought it to his customers. I know recently, as part of the Mobile World Conference, he was in Barcelona, Spain, where he held, again, one of his famous Q&As with Mark, but with customers. And so as we're going to see in our Rockefeller habits, two of those key habits is making sure that you're spending time every single week interacting directly with customers and with your employees and the broader part of your team. And once you figure out what the constraint is, the ultimate routine is to make sure that you're setting aside sufficient time every day or at least a few days every week in order to work on it. Now, I'm not asking for all 24 hours, but we're suggesting that you spend at least 60, 90 minutes, maybe 3 hours every few days focused on. So for instance, when Steve Jobs realized that the critical constraint in them distributing their products was retail and that he didn't really feel like there were any retailers out there that could represent his products well, they knew they needed to jump into that part of the business. And so they set up a mock-up store near Apple headquarters. And here's what's impressive. As busy as somebody like Steve Jobs was, he committed 3 hours every day, except Monday, which is their management meetings, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and most Saturdays and Sundays when he was dragging his buddy Larry Ellison over to the store to take a look at it as well. Over a 6-month period, dedicating that kind of consistent time to this priority resulted in one of the greatest retail concepts we've ever seen around the planet. And everybody sits around like surprised that he was able to do this, but it was all around the dedication of time. We've got the Olympics getting ready to come up, and they're coming up every 2 years. The great Olympic athletes, those that you've got children that you'd love to aspire to that, unless they're willing to get up at the crack of dawn at 4 a.m. and put in the time, the hours to swim, to run, to bike, they have no shot of achieving that as well. In fact, I love this quote from John Grisham, one of the great mystery writers out there. From 5 till 7 in the morning, I'd get up and go to the office that early. Again, it wasn't any fun, but it was a habit. It got to be a part of the daily routine. So, in conclusion, figure out what is the constraint, the thing you're going to focus on. And then it's critical that you carve out time. It may be 9 to 11:30 at night where you can give it the focused effort needed in order to get accomplished. So in this overview, we have covered so far, what are these fundamental principles that underpin scaling up? What are the 4 decisions in our framework that you're going to be working through? And then what is it we really need in order to support all of us if we're going to make this stuff work? One last topic, and that is I'm calling the gamification of business. Look, something really has changed. Organizations are going to need to adapt. We have this new internet-based world. We're seeing Zappos going through right now this introduction of what they're calling holacracy. We've already talked about this importance of reinventing organizations, and we're moving towards something that looks more like ant and bee colonies as they've structured places like Google and Facebook. And at the heart of this is this fundamental idea that the millennials, who drive about a third of the workforce now, at least in the United States, grew up on games. And look, I know senior executives that spend way too much time on Candy Crush. And so what is it about games like Candy Crush that's got people more excited to spend time doing that than to work in your business and on the priorities that are driving what it is that you're doing? And so I want to come to an analogy and take a look at the Olympics. Jessica Ennis-Hill, who had won the heptathlon for the British in London in 2012, is right now in the middle of training for the 2016 Olympics. Now, what is it about the Olympics where you got basically folks spending years of their lives for free, not getting paid, with the likelihood that they're not going to win anything. Yet, people are willing to put in the hours, and the audience is willing to watch passively, and we're both taken by this. I'm from Barcelona, Spain, obviously the location of the greatest sports team in the history of all sports teams. I say that knowing I've got folks from all over the world in this audience. But look, FC Barcelona has done amazing, as has Messi. What is it about sport that is so enticing that if we could capture those ideas and put them inside our own business, we could get the same enthusiasm and motivation? Let's take a look at that. And I want to reference a dear friend of mine, Jack Stack's book, one of the original faculty I had at the MIT program I launched and hosted there for many, many years. And he wrote a book called The Great Game of Business that he employed at his engine remanufacturing company in Springfield, Missouri, that he was able to, with a group of other companies, take to over $1 billion in revenue. And what we know about games that we can apply to business are these 4 things. First, what's great about sport is that there is a finish line. Could you imagine going to the Olympics and we're just going to watch people run, and we're just going to watch people swim, and just going to watch people bike? You would hate that. And we know that folks would rather watch the 100-meter race than the marathon. And so we know something about if you can have shorter finish lines, it's much more motivating. The kind of thing that Candy Crush gives you as you begin to move up the hundreds of levels. And Jack Stack and we, aligned with him, call that the critical number. What is that finish line? We've got to get mobile. We want to improve our gross margin from 42 to 55%. We want to triple the number of leads that we're getting in this business in the next 90 days. And so first and foremost, there is a finish line. And it's shorter, it's closer than it is further away. Now, given that, and everyone knows what we're trying to achieve, there's 3 other things that have to exist. First, you have to know and teach the rules. In all sport, there are boundaries. Man, if you're heading down the track and you step on that line, you're disqualified. Right now, we just saw Tom Brady receive a 4-game suspension, one of the greatest quarterbacks in American football history, because he played with a ball that was 1 pound per square inch deflated. We get more up in arms if somebody plays sport badly than we are some of the things that happen around us in our cities and our countries. That equivalent in your business are the core values and your brand promises. They provide the boundaries of the kind of behaviors and activities we're going to allow or disallow, and everybody in the organization needs to know what they are. Number 2, everyone needs to know the score. Could you imagine going to a sporting event, and it may be where you're sitting in the nosebleed section and you can barely see the action on the field, but you are always within eye shot of the scoreboard. Instead, at our companies, it'd be like playing a game and saying, well, we're going to let you know the score at the end of the day, or worse. You're not going to know the score till the end of the week, or maybe not until the end of the quarter. We're people who need to know exactly how we're progressing at every moment. And again, one of the reasons why video games are so enticing, not only to millennials, but everybody else on the planet. And then number 3, the importance of having a stake in the outcome. And by the way, what is it that most people are trying to achieve at a place like the Olympics? It's not an Olympic record or even a gold medal. I mean, that's going to be maybe for 1/10 of 1% of the participants. For almost everybody else, all they're trying to achieve is to do better than they did before. And at best, you're going to get little pieces of ribbon. As Napoleon said, with enough ribbon, I could conquer the world. And so we're not talking about elaborate compensation schemes. I'm just talking about appreciation and thanks and recognition and rewards and pieces of paper and handwritten notes so that people feel like that they're appreciated for what it is that they've achieved. And so there you've got the 4 critical components that are built in to the Rockefeller Habits 2.0. First, setting a finish line, and everybody knows what it is. And then knowing very clearly what the rules are, the core values and brand promise. And then, more frequent than not, knowing precisely what the score is. And then everybody at the end of that quarter having a party, a theme, event where they feel like they had a part in making the company successful. I want to share a quick example. Years ago, I had a chance to go down to the FedEx distribution facility. And that's one of the best run companies around the world. And any one night, they'll have 10,000 employees moving 5 to 10 million packages. By the way, 3,000 permanent, 7,000 temporary that come in for the few hours every night they need to unload and reload the planes with the boxes. And what's amazing when you go down and visit that distribution center is that within eyeshot of every single employee is a screen, is a scoreboard. And on there is one critical number. See, they know their brand promise. One of their boundaries is that we absolutely have to get the package there on time, which they've worked backwards, which means at the time I was visiting, that the planes need to be wheels up, all the planes at the Memphis Distribution Center, wheels up by 2:11 that morning. Now, what's neat about the system, at 10 o'clock at night when everyone's basically starting to gear up, that scoreboard will say something like 2:18, which tells everybody in the distribution center that we are roughly, 7 minutes behind. And I swear you feel like everyone just kind of speeds up. Every 15 minutes that's updated, and all of a sudden it may come back to 1:58, which says, wow, we're now 13 minutes ahead of schedule. And all night long, people are able to monitor in real time their activities and see the impact it's having on the finish line. And there is a finish line every single evening. And that's one of the reasons why I think the FedEx company runs so well. And so what can you do in equivalent manner to get this data in front of your folks? I want to take you down to Sydney, Australia, and a company called Red Balloon, founded by Naomi Simpson, an ex-marketing executive at Apple, who said, look, I want to change the way we do gifting. I want to gift from stuff to experiences. And early on, she set what we're going to call a big, hairy, audacious goal. And she wanted to get to about 10% of the Australians, 2 million of the 20 million in that country. And so the day she set that, 2005, she put up a scoreboard, as you can see in this photo. And it was with an eye shot of every one of the employees. And this scoreboard was updated every moment of every day as they started with the 7,500 that they had sold to date and tracked it all the way up to their goal of 2 million. At this point, they were at 1,118,000. By the way, a goal that they beat 2 years ahead of time. To kind of wrap up this overview, I want to take you to a new tool of ours we call the Vision Summary. And this summarizes the fundamental decisions that are critical for all your employees to be aware of if they're going to be able to stay aligned and help you scale up the business. And it's really divided into 3 parts. The top third is where you're laying out kind of the core values, purpose, BHAG, and brand promises that define a lot of the key strategies and culture of the organization. Based on that, if you look at the middle third, that's where we then say, okay, given that, what are the handful of objectives we've got to achieve in the next 3 to 5 years, priorities for the year, and then what is this critical number we're going to focus on for the next 90 days? And then we give a space at the bottom of the third of this document for every employee or team to fill in what they need to do in order to contribute to this vision, both short and long term, of the organization. And it all comes back again to this idea that the main thing is to keep the main thing, to keep us focused and aligned. And so let's now look at the components here individually. Let's start with this top third. And if you look over to the left, we've got the core values. Now, as we looked at the gamification, these are the rules, the boundaries that need to exist in every organization so people can make decisions independent of their leadership. In fact, it's one of the key things that'll free up the leadership from having to be involved in every day-to-day decision being made by the employees in the organization. Now, here's the warning, and we're going to get into this in more depth when we get to that section of this online course, but I see a lot of amateur work done in this core values space. You know, everyone got in a room, hey, we need core values, we've read about their importance, so we kind of survey everybody, put it up on Post-it note pads, and we end up with this very generic, I'm going to call it Boy Scout oath-like list of honesty, integrity, and customer service and teamwork, you know, the same that were at Enron's, and we know how that turned out. What's critical is that these core values are discovered. They're not a wish list, and there's a specific process that our certified Gazelles coaches will take you through based on the Mars mission exercise that Jim Collins outlined. Here's a great example of a company in the UK who recently employed one of our coaches to take about a year to get precisely what are the real core values discovered in the organization. Notice that these are phrases, not single words, that they're phrases that you would recognize if you knew this company to be indicative of who they are. And it's even the language that they would use. And so you're going to be shooting for a list 4 to 8 phrases like this when we get into that core values section of the online course. Once you've got the core values, next we've got to get clear what is the purpose. And this is where you're going to get that extra 40% discretionary effort that Aubrey Daniels in his famous book, Bringing Out the Best in People, first illuminated for many of us. The fact that, employees know what is the minimum they need to do, just kind of keep you off their back, to get their paycheck. But then there's this extra effort that they can choose to give you or not. And if they don't give it at work, they're going to find other extracurricular activities where they can put this effort into. And at the heart of it is the importance, as Simon Sinek suggested in his book, Start With Why, that it comes back to a purpose. And by the way, a purpose of trying to make you rich isn't necessarily going to be one of the most motivating ideas for everybody else in the organization. No, this has got to be a purpose that really addresses this fundamental human question, which is, why am I here? What difference am I going to make while I'm around on this planet? And so what I've got here is just to give you a feel for it, a list of some of the purposes of well-known organizations around the world. Now, this purpose isn't a word, but it typically revolves around a word or a core idea. For instance, let's take 3M, and I used to do a lot of the strategy planning work with the Post-it Note division at 3M. Got to know Art Fry himself, who created the Post-it Note. Most people around the world, when I've asked the question, what's the word that you associate with 3M? It's the word innovation. In fact, it's the biggest honor that you can achieve. It's like the Oscar of the company. In the book, Greatest Business Decisions, I highlight that in 1950, 3M allowed all employees 15% on-the-job time to work on any innovation that they were interested in, an idea that 50 years later, Google adopted at 20%. This idea that we are here to innovate is in the very DNA of everyone that they've got inside the organization. And in fact, it drives a lot of their plain metrics that they look at. 30% of their revenue must come from products less than 4 years old. And so this innovation and being able to bring ideas that make people's lives better is at the heart of what keeps people excited at a company that introduced last year 1,000 new products alone. Nike, what's their purpose? And surely it's more than making cheap tennis shoes with cheap labor around the world. And it's always been clear that their higher purpose has been around this celebration, this recognition, this encouragement of the competitive spirit that's within all of us. And to take it further, every one of their meeting rooms on campus, the art that they've got up on the walls and around the campus is all indicative of highly competitive people. And by the way, if you're not competitive, forget about working there or even really interacting much with the company. They're fierce around this idea. And it's why their commercials are less about their products and more about the kind of thing that reaches people's hearts as opposed to their heads. Disney, clearly it's always been about, since Walt launched the company, about happiness, putting a smile on a child's face. What's interesting is most recently they realized that children enjoy their experience at Disney, but the parents don't. You often don't see a lot of parents with smiles on their faces, and they recognize this. And so they've created a Fitbit-like band that allows you to kind of pre-program your experience at Disney so that you don't wait in any line longer than 5 to 10 minutes. So they can then work harder to put a smile on everyone's face at that organization. Walmart, we know it's to sell cheap stuff, but from the very beginning, Sam Walton always saw Walmart, and it's an image, this idea that they're the Robin Hood of the world. In fact, their ads, at least in the United States, have always been images of this kind of round, happy face with this kind of Robin Hood-like hat and bow and arrow going around shooting down prices. But they've been real aligned around this idea that our job was to figure out how to get poor folks, as they said it, the same stuff as rich folk. Now, you don't have to agree with this, but it's been a principle that they've been able to align around and build one of the largest retail companies in the world, Microsoft. You know, obviously theirs is monopoly, and by the way, their word isn't far away from that. And you would expect this to be kind of the idea that a guy like Bill Gates would come up with. In fact, in their 40th anniversary letter that he recently wrote all the employees to celebrate that milestone, he came back and reminded everyone that, look, the fundamental reason we exist, even though we're wealthy, beyond belief, as he is the wealthiest guy today on the planet, is to make sure that we bring technology to everybody, that it is ubiquitous. Because his belief is that we really can't realize the power of technology until it's in the hands of everyone and not those that can just afford an Apple iPhone. One of the reasons why they did the Nokia acquisition, they've got Skype, because if they can get people free, cheap or free communication and connection around the globe, they're going to continue to be able to solve a lot of the human problems that Bill and his wife have dedicated through their foundation work. But Starbucks, come on. We can maybe see how these other companies have got this kind of unifying purpose, but what about a company that basically sells overpriced coffee and most of their 200,000 employees are teenagers? I mean, you think it's hard to have one or two teenagers. How would you like to have that as a workforce? This is where it's critical, and that's why I want to come to, that every one of you is a leader, and I don't care where you are in your leadership role within the organization. You need to have this speech, this stump speech, this story that you tell over and over and over that keeps people's hearts engaged in the business. And so I want to kind of, in a way, replicate Howard Schultz's basic speech that he continues to give. And when they shut down Starbucks around the world famously for a day, it wasn't really to teach everybody how to make a better latte. It was to remind everyone why we're in business in the first place. And the story goes like this. Look, I grew up in the projects of New Jersey, the kind of the armpit of the U.S., so to speak. And all I ever wanted to do, Howard Schultz saying this, is escape. And he said, that's what we are. We're that escape. We're that third place where everyone has historically always needed in order to remain sane and happy. There's always been this one place, the sense of work accomplishment, and people who don't really have that are missing a piece. There's also this importance to have a sense of home, and we've got a lot of refugees and camps that have lost that part of what it means to be happy. But having a sense of accomplishment or work and home isn't sufficient. There's always been a need for this third place between actually home and work and home. Now, traditionally it had been, in many cases, the church. We've got a client, Dina Dwyer Owens, named one of the top women business owners in the United States, who continues to still go to church every single day. That's her sanctuary. For others, it's the pub, a place where everybody knows your name. And by the way, I like to tongue-in-cheek say, if you're in Ireland, that church and that pub are located right next to each other and just kind of rotate, rinse, and repeat every 12 hours. But you know what? That's not for everybody. And so Starbucks, for a lot of the people around the world, have become that place as they're going from home on their way to work and back, where they can stop for just a moment and purchase an affordable, that's not a cup of coffee, that's an affordable luxury for themselves, and sit in what's a nice home living room environment and just escape for a moment, where a hardworking truck driver or nurse or homemaker or entrepreneur can just relax. And so that's Starbucks. Again, you can buy into it or not, but that's their stump speech. That's their story. So what's critical, and we'll get into that deeper and how you do that later on, it's important that you figure out what is this core purpose that's going to drive scaling up your business. If we move over then to the third box, the brand promises, we continue to define the very important boundaries of the organization that allows every employee to make decisions independently when they know that. And that's what we call the brand promises. What are the things that you're going to absolutely promise the customer, like we're going to have it delivered by 10:30 in the morning as FedEx does, for your organization? And what's interesting is the research is clear that 3 is ideal. 3 is much more impactful than 2 or 4 or a list of 10. And as an example, again, we'll get into that deeper later into the course. But as an example, one of our clients in the Philippines, and that's a place where these ferries have been sinking and killing a lot of folks, he went out and purchased about a half a dozen of these $10 million ferries you see here in the picture. And the business is called FastCat, and his real purpose, they've got a set of core values. Their real purpose is to kind of really help get everybody reconnected among the hundreds of islands that make up the Philippines. But he said, Vern, you're going to be proud of us. Right on the side of the ferry, we painted our 3 brand promises. First, that we are ferry safe. Number 2, that we're ferry fast. And that number 3, we're ferry convenient. Obviously a play on the word ferry. And what's powerful is they have got real metrics that they're tracking every hour of every day that tell them real time that they're keeping these 3 brand promises. One other example of brand promises, we've got a lot of dentists that happen to use our tools around the world. And here's one of our clients who has been clear that, look, obviously we want to do a good job of repairing your teeth and cleaning them, but those are kind of table stakes. The 3 things that we're going to promise are, 1, that you're happy with how fast we answer the phone. Number 2, were you seen on time? Number 3, then, was the treatment, probably most importantly, pain-free? And notice here that it makes it very simple, even for a child, to circle, are they sad, neutral, or a happy face? And then they ask the ultimate Fred Reichheld question, on a scale of 1 to 10, would you recommend us to a friend? And so the key is to define it, keep it simple, and make sure your customers have a chance to give you feedback. And so that's the components of the top part of our vision summary. Now, right at the juicy red core center of this vision summary is the ultimate long-term critical number, what Jim Collins and Jerry Porras trademarked and termed the big, hairy, audacious goal. And it's a 10 to 25 year measurable goal. Why does it need to be at least 10 years? So nobody can debate you. You can make up almost anything. If it's shorter than that, you'll get into fierce discussions. And so I want to go back as an example to Naomi Simpson and Red Balloon. 10 years ago, she was sitting in a workshop similar to this, had sold about 7,500 of these experience gift vouchers, and she realized that she needed something big that was out there. And so she made a simple calculation. I don't think I'm going to conquer the world, but I'd like to be prominent and significant in Australia, where she's based. And a back-of-the-napkin calculation said, we got about 20 million Australians. If we could get 10% of them to pivot from giving stuff to giving experiences, we would have made a real dent in our universe around our purpose of the importance of gifting people things that they can remember versus stuff that's consumed within maybe a week. And so with that calculation, she said, my goal by 2015 is to have reached 2 million experiences distributed. And then, as I showed you earlier, they put up a scoreboard, began to track it, and 2 years early, they were able to crush that particular goal. They've now reset it for the next 10 years, and they're moving forward. So we've got the 4 major components that make up the top third of our vision summary. Now, I want to give you a warning. What you don't want to do is take those 4 items, stick them in a martini shaker, shake them out, and come out with one of these things you call a vision statement. We want to be number 1 or number 2 in this particular market while being a great place to work, taking care of our customers, giving back to our community. We'll throw in a little bit of green because that's, hot and sexy right now. And we've created a statement that no one in the organization will ever remember or be able to repeat again. See, there's a reason why our phone numbers are divided up into segments, so that it's much easier for us to remember them and to share them. Our brain is designed to actually remember stuff by compartmentalizing it. And so we highly encourage you not to fall for that vision summary stuff, that vision statement stuff, and instead keep separate and clear what are our core values, separate from what is our purpose, dash, separate what is our brand promises, dash, then what is our big, hairy, audacious goal. Now that we've got the top third filled in, now it's time for us to begin to break it down into, all right, what do we got to do to realize this vision over the next quarter, year, and 3 to 5 years? And I want you to kind of equate this as a mountain climb, where the big, hairy, audacious goal is your Everest. It's your organization's top goal. And like climbing to Everest, what's important then is to have some base camps along the way. Think of those kind of 3 to 5 year strategic objectives. Then be clear, what is it we need to do the next year? And most importantly, what is the next step, the next 90 days? And what's interesting is in scaling up a mountain or your business, the only two things I think you can be pretty sure about is what is the goal? Hey, I want to get to 2 million Australians with our gift vouchers. And what is I need to do to take the next step, the next 90 days? Everything in between we're going to call a WAG, a wild ass guess. Because as the great Prussian general von Clausewitz said, your strategy's only as good as your next encounter with the enemy. And I want you to think about it this way. There are no straight lines in nature. A river that's going from Everest down to the ocean has got to follow the contours of the land like you've got to follow the contours of the marketplace. And, I love flying over countries. And when you look at rivers, sometimes they look like they're going backwards to make some progress. And look, that's going to be the case in your company. So anyone who tells you this thing is a straight line journey, hasn't really done anything, in the real world. It is a series of ups and downs with you constantly adjusting to the market conditions as you move this organization forward. And so, and by the way, this is what it looks like. We've got a client of ours in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, McLean, and very much that is their growth path you see here on this chart that mirrors that path up to Everest as we showed prior. And so I want to share an example. I want to kind of bring this whole overview to a close and take you to Galway, Ireland. A good friend of mine, Gene Brown, launched a company up there called the City Bin Company. At the time, 60 employees in 2010. Not doing anything high tech. They are hauling trash. And by the way, they're in one of the worst economies at that time, one of the pig countries being Ireland. And so things were tough. But Gene had heard about our course, made the trip to the United States, and attended this equivalent 2.5-day program that you are dialed into yourselves, and came out of it and said, look, first of all, what we need, even though we're in the depths of this kind of great recession, right now, all I'm trying to do is make payroll every Friday, is we need a goal. And so he made a bold decision that in 2010, that by 2020, he wanted to have 1 million customers. Now, I want to put this in perspective. There's only about 70,000 people in all of Galway. There's only 100,000 households in all of Dublin. I mean, if he had 100% market share of all of Ireland, he'd be lucky to have close to 1 million. And no one in this industry is going to have that kind of domination. And so he knew he was going to have to get not only out of Ireland, but through Europe and maybe even through the Middle East. This was a big, hairy, audacious goal. Now, once he had that set, now it was time to start the climb. And so, again, to be honest, the first then 24 months was really just trying to survive. Then at about 2012, first quarter, things started to turn around, both in the economy, he was starting to get some momentum, and he realized now it was time for him to get much more precise about what was the critical number, the game that they were going to play every 90 days. And so the key question is, Where was the constraint? That's why you always want to come back to that fundamental idea. And he said the real key constraint next is cash flow. There are some things I need to do now to grow and expand this business, and that's going to require cash. And so he set a very specific theme around life begins at 40. And the goal was very precise. Not that we want to make more money, but precisely we want to add $40,000 in more margin every month for the next 3 months, which would give him an extra $500,000 for the year. So he put up, as you can see with our example here, created a nice visual, had this put up in all of the garbage trucks and around the offices. And most importantly, he, like Mark Zuckerberg, got on message. Every single day it was driven around a question. What can you do to help us get the extra 40,000? What can you do? What can you do? What can you do? And it was this constant repetition around this one idea. Well, sure enough, in 90 days they did it. They generated an extra 120,000 in margin. And then what did he do? They knew the boundaries, had the core values. They then wanted, importantly, share in the state, piece of the outcome. And so he took 40,000 of the 120,000 and he spread it around his 60 employees as a nice, roughly 700 bonus, and then threw them a great party. All right, wow, it worked. So what do you do next? What's the next step? Well, he looked at his own situation, the company, and he realized even at 60 employees, they were starting to feel focused around function instead of actually getting the work done. In fact, there was a lot of tension inside the organization. Coming out of the recession, sales wanted to land certain clients, but the folks over in finance didn't want to extend them credit, and it created a lot of tension between those two departments. As sales is just trying to grab any revenue they can, they weren't being particular about where it was located and causing the guys driving the trucks to have to go way out of their way and fight traffic possibly to get that commercial customer they had signed up. So a lot of tension between the various functions. And so Gene realized where the first one was really working on process and the P&L, he now needed to work on the people side. He needed to get his team working together again as one. And so he created a theme called 180 to 1. Now, where did the 180 come from? Again, he didn't say, hey guys, would everybody work better as a team? Look, we need to know specifically the measurable outcome so we can keep score. He said, here's what I want us to specifically do. Every employee is to work one day in a job share with someone from another department per month for the next 3 months. So 60 employees, 1 day a month, times 3 months. We're going to do 180 job sharing days. I want finance to go out with the salespeople and see what they're facing. Salespeople, I want you to ride on those garbage trucks. And that's what he was on every single day. His question was, what have you done to, job share? What did you learn? How many days have we got for the quarter achieved? And sure enough, at the end of the 90 days, they hit the 180. And again, through a big celebration and party, and more importantly, felt like now his team was ready with the additional cash, working together as one to scale up this business. Third quarter. And by the way, he put up some beautiful posters, again, to remind folks of the particular theme. Now it was time to come up with the next step. And as luck would have it, he's walking by his assistant's desk, and he needed her to do something urgently, and she was constrained. And what was the constraint? She was working through this very complex Excel spreadsheet. He realized it was one that he had assigned to her to start back in the Great Recession, tracking literally at a time when they were robbing Peter to pay Paul, that he had not looked at now for the last 2.5 years. But she had not had the courage to really bring it up to Gene. Why was she still needing to do this? And he realized that if she was scared and maybe doing stuff that didn't make sense and afraid to mention something, how many other employees were in the same situation? So his third quarter theme was called Bin It, and right there you'll see on the screen, there was his question. If it's wasting time, energy, money, or space, let's get rid of it. And for the next 90 days, they focused on that diligently. Actually created new language within the company that still exists today, giving people the freedom to tell the king they have no clothes on, to tell Gene that we're doing stuff that doesn't make sense. By the way, the result, they cleared out about 25% of their time, which improved their capacity without having to add any headcount and continued to save them additional money. Now, they have continued to figure out the constraint and focus on it every 90 days since. I'll give you an update here in 2015. They realized that they had not focused enough on dynamic pricing. That why do we have a fixed price for every same account when we know every account's not the same? And so they put a theme together called The Price is Right, drove on it for 90 days, and the result was they were able to increase the average revenue per customer by 7%, which is significant in an environment where everyone is still quite price sensitive in Ireland. Now, along the way, give you the latest update. They ended up finding The Right Who, a major private waste management company out of Dubai, doing about $350 million a year in revenue that they've now hooked up with. And Gene is in the process of crushing what was that million customer big, hairy, audacious goal he had set in 2012. And so there's the key. Set the big, hairy, audacious goal. Don't worry too much about what happens in between. And then get crystal clear, what is the constraint? What's the rock that's in my way getting up that mountain? And then put a theme around it. And if everybody knows the rules, knows the score, knows obviously what is the finish line, and then has a fun stake in the outcome, if nothing else, a fun party to celebrate the win or to commiserate if we lost, that's how you gamify the company. Now, let's say you don't want to do all that fancy stuff that Gene does. I mean, you look at those charts and you're thinking, wow, how do I start with something that looks that great? Look, to give you another example, maybe one that's not as fancy as what Gene has done, I want to take you to Jim Tobin at Ignite Social Media. And he was sitting in our workshop the end of November, and he was wrestling with what is this constraint? He had 28 employees. They were a kind of social media company. And they had just put in a new project management system to kind of keep track of all the projects that they were taking on. And the system was telling him that they had all of these late and unassigned tasks that he knew wasn't true. It just meant nobody was using the system. And I know that's never happened to any of you. You've, in your company, put in a new system, a CRM or whatever, and no one's using it. And so Jim said, look, we've got a month till the end of the year. Why wait for the next quarter? Let's get on this now. And so he used one of the most important management tools ever created, and that is the whiteboard. And he goes back, and in their break room, he puts up a very simple whiteboard, as you see here on the screen. And he wrote simply late 241, unassigned 728. Now, nothing fancy. He did use 2 different colors, which I think was good. And then he put out a very simple note to the 28 employees. Hey, we've got a new project management system, and I don't think any of you guys have noticed. It's saying we've got all these late and unassigned tasks. If you could get that to 0 by the end of the year in a month, that would be great. That was it. Nothing fancy, nothing highly motivating. And he was blown away that within 24 hours, in fact, he said, if I didn't see it, I wouldn't have believed it. He took a photo of it and sent it to me, why it's on the screen as you see it and in the Scaling Up book. In 24 hours, his lates had dropped by 25% and his unassigns in half. And you know the rest of the story. By the end of the month, he was able to get that down to 0. He got everyone using the project management system. And in the next 4 years, he was able to quadruple the size of the company. Now, he wouldn't sit here to say that was solely the reason why, but that was the most important next step. That if he hadn't got that accomplished, he's pretty convinced he wouldn't have got all the next set of initiatives accomplished that allowed him to achieve that kind of significant growth. So now we've defined what is the top of the vision summary. We've now looked at kind of how you think through how to break this down, particularly to quarterly priorities to move the organization forward. What you're going to do then, and we're going to describe this later in detail, at the bottom third, is that's then when you sit down with every employee and every team and you say, all right, what is it that you can do to help us move this organization forward? So I want to wrap this up around the vision summary with one of my favorite stories of Cynthia Kay's company, Logical Choice Technologies. And I take you back a period when she had about 120 employees. She was selling computer systems to governments and hospitals and schools in the state of Georgia. And things are going well. And because these organizations pay so slowly, she had to have a fairly significant credit line with a bank that needed to grow in order to scale up the business. Well, anyway, one day, she gets a call because she'd been growing so rapidly from the bank, or actually her CFO said, look, Cynthia, we got a problem. We're in violation of one of our bank covenants, our debt to equity ratio, and they're going to shut off our line of credit. And if they do, we're out of business tomorrow. And this was a significant constraint, obviously, to Cynthia moving forward. Now, what was interesting is rather than Cynthia and her CFO alone wrestling with this issue, she said, look, why don't I make this our critical number? Why don't I open this up to all 120 employees and see what they can do to help us? And so she goes out to Home Depot, gets these 4x8 sheets of whiteboard, goes into her nice conference room where she would host the officials that she would sell the systems to. And right on the wall, she put these whiteboards. And then with a magic marker, not unlike Ignite Social Media, she drew this huge debt to equity ratio. And then one by one, team by team, she brought her employees in and set them down and said, look, that's what we need to accomplish. And let's figure out what it is that you can do, what you can focus on in order to help us move that forward. By the way, that's doing your job well, what we're going to call those fundamental KPIs that everyone must have for their job. And more importantly, what are the one or two priorities, and most importantly, the critical number, the one thing that you can most do to help us improve this number. And out of that, you'll have a handful of to-dos that allow you to kind of pitch in. And by the way, if you have 120 employees and each has one or two additional things they're going to help out, you can get 240 things accomplished. And so that's how this methodology works. Well, anyway, she's bringing in her receptionist. And Anna, she thought, look, what can my receptionist do to help with the debt to equity ratio? She's not even going to understand it. But remember, the critical number is what is critical. And so she goes, look, you open up the mail, and every once in a while we get sent a check right to the company instead of to the bank or our lockbox. And you know what we need you to do is take that down to the bank. And she realized that her receptionist actually hated getting these checks in the mail because it meant she had to find somebody to cover for her and go out sometimes in bad weather to the bank, often over her lunch hour. But when she described to the receptionist that, look, this debt to equity simply is the amount of money we have in the bank versus what we owe the bank. And if checks are in by 3 o'clock and they're watching us every day, that's going to help increase this one number and make this graph move down. That was it. She really thought it went in one ear and out the other. Almost like Jim Tobin, 24 hours later, she's sitting in her office the next morning and she hears this screaming. She doesn't quite know what it is, and she peeks out her office, and it's her receptionist running around saying, I got a check, and somebody else is diving for the desk. I'll cover for you. What amazed Cynthia is the day before, this receptionist hated getting checks. The next day, she felt a part of the team and contributing what was an important critical number to eliminate a constraint to move the business up. Well, long story short, everybody pitched in as she had asked, and they fixed this problem within weeks, almost to a point where the bank didn't believe it. You know, they had to come knocking privately on the door to see what was going on. You know, it was something else illegal happening out the back that they got this thing fixed. And Cynthia brings the bankers into the conference room, and they see bigger than life this debt to equity chart on the wall and said, what's that? And they said, that's our problem. And that's what we needed everybody to help us fix. And the bank was so impressed, they'd never seen a client do this, that they not only renewed the line, but they increased it. And the long of the story here is Cynthia was able then to scale up this business to $98 million in revenue before she sold it.